So one thing I try to not do with this podcast is actually talk about my personal life very much. I mean, there's a lot of different reasons for that, and one of them being that, with the exception of bitch boys and haters, my personal life just is not really all that interesting. But last night, something semi-interesting did happen. I was involved in I guess you would call it an almost fight. It was really more of an altercation at a gym here in Grand Prairie, and I'll just kind of tell the story as it happened, and then afterwards you can kind of tell me whether or not you think that whether or not I went overboard or not. And so, I was working on a squat machine, and periodically throughout the day I'd kind of notice that, it actually happens quite often at this gym, and the staff doesn't really seem to care to do very much about it. But a lot of the racks, a lot of people just put things back, put the plates back jumbled. And so literally you'll have like 5-pound plates buried by 45s, or you'll have 10, 25, 35, 45-pound plates all on the same little bar on the rack. And when you follow somebody who's done that, it's extremely disorderly. You have to actually rip off all of the heavier weight if you want to get down to the lighter stuff underneath if you happen to need that. And it's just really, in my view, extremely inconsiderate of the people that happen to follow you at that particular station. And so I noticed it going on for, it's easily been at least a couple of months now. But I could never really quite figure out exactly who it was that was responsible for this. And personally, I think that's a really good question. I think there is a real question there of who actually is responsible in these kinds of situations. I think that a lot of people that go into these facilities, they just kind of assume that it's supposed to be up to the staff to clean up after them, and I don't really agree with that. I think that the customers who go in there should kind of clean up after themselves as they go and leave these things in an orderly condition so that people who follow them can use them and the staff don't have to go and rip all of that stuff out and organize everything and put it back on. And so when I actually saw somebody go and mess up one of these racks, actually pretty much like immediately after I had kind of cleaned it up myself, I got really, really pissed off. And so I walked over to the rack and I started to rip off these 45-pound plates that they were burying all these other lighter plates with, and I just threw them on the ground. And obviously I got the guy's attention because he was standing there staring at me, but he wasn't really going over to do anything, about this mess that he had made. And so I walked right up to him and I said, I would have just assumed that a guy that your age would know better than to do something like this. And he says to me, "Oh, I don't understand what you're talking about." And I said to him, "Well, you put back these racks, put these weights back on the rack, and it's an absolute mess. How do you think the people who are following you at these stations like that?"
"Oh, well, I didn't think that it matters."
Well, it definitely matters to anybody that might be following you at this particular station. So why don't you think about somebody other than yourself for a change? Clean up after yourself. Don't make the rest of us do it. I'm sick and tired of cleaning up after you. And so this guy, he's sitting there and he's looking for any little angle that he can try and find to try and twist this thing. He says to me, he's like, "Oh, well, I can't put these things back in a mess, but you can rip them off and throw them on the floor." And I said to him, "You know what? Yeah, that's exactly what I'm going to do. That's exactly what I'm going to do. If you're going to make a mess out of them, they might as well be on the damn floor." And so as we're having this conversation, it continually escalates, and eventually it's not too long before this guy's standing there with his middle finger out and he's screaming, "Fuck you, asshole! Fuck you!" And I'm just sitting here looking at him, and I just say to him, I could snap that finger off and I could put it someplace a little bit more appropriate than where you're putting right now, if that's what you want. And the guy, obviously he had no idea what to say to that, so we kind of clammed up, and I just said to him, "I'm really sorry that is so, just the idea of showing some consideration to the people that follow you at this gym, I'm sorry that is so offensive to you that you have to behave like this." So at that point, the entire thing, in my opinion, was pretty much resolved. The thing got cleaned up. He cleaned up his mess. I was at the end of my workout, so went and showered, went home. The whole thing was over. And I haven't really heard a single other thing about it since then. But the interesting thing about it is that I am sure that this is still something that was going on in gyms, before the whole COVID-19 pandemic. And so with that in mind, I actually kind of think to myself, it's like, I don't actually clearly remember being as bothered by this, before the pandemic, as I am bothered by it now. Like, I don't remember confronting anybody about it, before the pandemic, but I've done this actually on at least a couple of occasions now. And so, I just kind of think to myself, I mean, it's like, you almost have to ask yourself if, if you've basically kind of like, developed like a, like a late stage ADHD, or even like an obsessive compulsive disorder, who knows? I don't know that such things like are impossible to happen. But I guess the one question that kind of looms in my mind is, I mean, for people that do go to gyms, does it annoy you when people, leave the racks behind them in a mess with all of these plates? Was I overreacting, or was I about right? Please do let me know in the comments. I'd actually like to hear your thoughts about that.